The images above that you are seeing are the ones that you should have been going over. Our bell work, then it switches over into the rainy day, and then finally our snowscape. Make sure that you do your bell work, then the rainy day, and now for lesson 9, snowscape. When you think about snow, you need to make sure you're thinking about direction. Which side is your sun side and which side is your shade? But first, you need some supplies. Those supplies are a type of B pencil, a knead eraser, a wedge eraser, sketching pencil, number 2-ish smudging stump, eyeglass cleaner material, which is just the cloth only, makeup blend or a makeup blender, and a smudging stump and an eraser sheet.
All right, we are making a snow scene.
Background part and creating mountains.
We started with the mountains, and I have a passel of pencils, and I recommend that you have eyeglass,
if you wish. Make sure that your mountains overlap
cleaner, smudging
Make
stump,
sure that they
a B4,
pointed.
B5,
That is going to be one of those
B8,
grades that we have in there. That's going to
B6s,
be very good to know.
any of those, a
Have
regular
sharp pointed
pencil,
mountains, because not all of them are pointed.
a knead eraser,
And make sure that you get your shading correct,
so that you're
can
able
differentiate
to
between
create
your
several
sky and
different variations in
and what
here.
I'm gonna go over
Sometimes
here is
graphite
I've already colored the sky and the
helps.
mountains,
You
but
will
I'm not
need
liking all of the swirls and lines.
a
in
knead
the sky,
eraser, but very
which we
seldom.
don't
So
see
we're
that
going
unless
to
it's
start
actually a
adding
stormy
details
day.
to our mountains.
I have
This is
clouds
one that
already
I've
in the
had my
sky,
students
so that
working
means
on
that there is not necessarily a storm
to get
My
them
clouds will be
to
clear. So we're gonna work on the
start
sky
their
right now.
piece. We did an
And
introduction.
with that, we're going to make sure that we kind of add a little bit more color
I'm
to
adjusting the
sky.
camera real quick.
There's
Okay.
going to be a lot of drawing, erasing.
So we
and
have
drawing.
our
So don't be
mountain.
upset if that happens.
And we're
because
going
you think, why are
to
we doing this? We just did
smudge in
that. So what I'm starting
the
off is I'm
shadow.
making my shaded
Our
side of the
sun
mountains a little darker,
sits
so that
on the
I
right
can
hand
actually
side.
see the shadow. Since my sun is on the
left-hand side of our image.
See my hand over there.
And we
The right side
are
actually has to be darker. I do
creating
not want my sky to be darker than my mountain. If my sky is darker than my mountain, then I have
more
to
of a depth for our mountains. Okay. Now if you notice, I have a lot of little scribbles up here, and we want to get rid of them. So we're going to take and do a swirl with our pencil. Now I am dyslexic, so it makes it easier for me to actually draw upside down.
What that's going to do is it's actually going to...
And my big space for my clouds
I'm holding my pencil sideways with my index finger laying at the
is what I
tip
plan on
of
adding my
where
details
the
to
wood
later.
should
Now if you notice, I
shape
have
right here.
part of my clouds.
I'm continuing those circles so that I can get the maximum
Yes?
amount of my graphite onto the
Yes.
paper. I'm going to take a bit of material that we use on clean glasses, which is my most favorite material to use in blending for a massive area. I don't like using a smudging stump because it's too restricted as far as, see there, I'm holding my pencil. It's very important that you hold it that way. That material works like your finger. Well, sometimes our fingers get sweaty and oily, and it's not really all that great for your oily fingers to be on there. So we want to make sure that we're using something that's dry. Tissue is one of your things if you really do not have any other type of way to do your sky. T-shirt material will work. It's not near as good. Very thin piece of leather. That's kind of what this cotton material feels like. It feels like a very soft leather. You'll have to keep working it because it's very slick. I do not recommend that you wash these until they're just so black you can't get anything out of them. But these are mainly meant for blending and to prevent your fingers from getting the oils into the paper. Because if you get your oils in there, it's very difficult to erase. So what I'm trying to do here is I'm actually trying to get rid of those lines in the sky. I don't want those lines, and I don't want my mountains to be the same color as my sky. So I'm going to be fixing that later on. Now I'm going in and I'm adding just a little bit of shading into the clouds. Again, I do not want a whole lot of my clouds to be as dark as my sky. It's got to be a little bit lighter. So I'm not pushing down real hard. I'm just mixing in a little bit of cloud color in there, a grayish color. If you used grayscale, more than likely when you see heavy clouds in the mountains, you would probably see the grayscale of gray color in your clouds, not necessarily it being white. So that is one thing you really have to watch out for, is that you don't exactly color your clouds white. The white area means that there is sun hitting on those clouds, while the lower half of your clouds will not be white. So now I'm taking my smudging stump because I want to differentiate the different puffiness of the clouds, and I want them to show those really cool bumps and lumps of a cumulus cloud that's in there. There's a scientific word. See, we use science in art as well. You want to make sure that you are able to make those nice cumulus clouds that have a really good sense of fluffiness, and they're not going to all be at the bottom either. As you could tell in the left side, I've created a shading in there. Now I'm taking my knead eraser and I'm just where I want the sun to hit the clouds is where I'm going to make the light part be. And no, it's not going to all be on top either. I'm going to have them in different areas. But for now, I'm going to have most of my white part on top. But I'm also going to mix, as you can tell, mix some of those light parts in there. In order to create that value, you have to, it's easier to shade everything and erase with a knead eraser, and then stretch out your knead eraser to clean it up and do some more erasing. As you can tell, the clouds are starting to look a little more like they should. Again, I used my finger and I shouldn't have, because that's area, if my hands were real oily, would be very difficult to erase. I'm kind of giving my cumulus clouds a heavy weight to it because I could put off that there is a storm coming. And in Arizona, where I was raised, clouds will be heavy, and you'll know that that section of that mountain is getting probably hit. Having that light sky, but those darker clouds on bottom, could mean a very heavy snowstorm. Now I'm cleaning up the side of my mountains where I want that snow to be, trying not to add that too much of the shading on that side of my mountain. And what I'm also doing is I'm creating a darker edge. I want my mountains on the shaded side to actually have a darker shading to it. I will do some erasing, and I will also take some of that shading and blend it into the snow on the left-hand side, sorry. My right-hand side, I'm creating those colors so that my mountain is separate from my sky. I want my mountain to be darker so that you can see it better. And now I'm creating a ledge. I'm going to zoom in here in a little bit. And I am doing this in my classroom in the middle of teaching class as well. So I'm zooming in, and this is why we're doing a voiceover. I'm erasing a section of the mountains there, as you can tell, because it's reflecting some of that sunlight from the mountain on the right-hand side, the middle mountain, and it will create a reflection even from the areas down below. All of that reflects and creates different areas. And what I've done is I've kind of created a weird, either it could be a cave, it could be a couple of eagle's nests. And now what I'm doing is I'm just pressing down with my knead eraser to get those different ledges. And I'm going along the lighter side so that I can kind of figure out what I want to do with the ledging of my landscape. So I'm creating vertical and horizontal lines, giving the fragmented rocks like we had done in our bell work, and creating those ledges in there. And I'm just taking and dabbing some of those, that shadow part that I created using my knead eraser. And I'm following those erased lines to create those ledges. It's really easy to do. You just kind of have to see those lines in there. And as you can see, I've pushed down rather hard on mine. And I'm going back over for the shadow part. And I'm creating some more ledging part. And I do apologize for it to blinking in and out. It's probably because I've paused it and had some students I was working with. So as soon as I can, I will try to edit the image part. So if I don't get to it, you'll be seeing this for a while until I get that editing part. Now, some of this is going to be erased. Right now it looks like there could be a road. This is why it has those little ridges on there. I could have cliffs in there. There could be embankments. And what we're doing is we're just creating the one section that we need to have for our mountains. And then you just kind of blow off all the fragments of the eraser. Now I'm going to take the edges. I'm going to pull down onto the snow to create a shadow, so it gives that visual aesthetic for light and shade. And then we have, you want to have everything blended real well. Take your eraser, your knead eraser, and pull off some of that shaded part so you can have that light snow coming down, but making it look like the snow is really bright on that mountain. And you just slowly work with it. You never know what happens sometimes out of these. They just turn out. I had thought about doing a speed drawing of this, but I have come to the conclusion that if I did that for a class, then it would be difficult for me to explain. And what I'm showing you here is I like using the cloth over the smudging stump because it has a softer smudge to it than the sharper smudge of a smudging stump. Again, I should not have used my finger there. It'll make it very difficult to erase if I wanted to erase there. But I'm trying to blend out as much of the lines. If you can't get out the lines, then you need to work a little bit more on that sky, and that's what I should do. Now, I'm creating some like ski slope lines as if somebody has gone skiing down there. And you just create these little lines. They're going to be wavy. And again, back to me doing the vocal here for students so that I can talk you through the reasoning why. Whereas if I did a speed drawing, a lot of the students would be confused. Why did you do that? Why did you create this? Now, when you're walking up a slope in skis, you cannot go very fast and you have to walk sideways. So these marks that I'm creating is a skier's mark from walking up the hill. Now, what I had anticipated on doing later on into this image is creating a, I guess a ski, what do you call them? where they transport skiers from one mountain to the next, to a different spot. It'll come to me later. Right now, this is the tree lesson that I didn't give you in the bell work. All I'm doing, very simply, is just going back and forth. Now, you will not be able to see very much of the snow on these trees. And sometimes there are strange trees that grow on the side of a mountain. And they'll grow real weird because maybe an avalanche happened and laid that tree down, or torrential rain and it didn't have a good rooting system inside the rock part of the mountain. So these little cracks and crevices that we're creating is where it has hung on to. You can go into deeper detail if you wish, but since this is a beginner's drawing skill set, we're just going to keep it as simple as possible and not go real hard into making such details, not yet. We're going to move on into the second mountain. You'll see changes into the first mountain that we did later on. I'm stopping at the road and then I'm going to skip it, and I'm just going to basically create the edge of the shadow part, and then I have to shade that in. Now I want to make sure that my clouds are not a part of my mountain. I want them to be separate, so I'm pulling them away. And then my road will kind of look like dirty snow. Sometimes the one part that's dark on the left-hand side and seems a little too dark is usually because graders come up in there and they will grade that area so that travelers can come up. And I should have taken those drawings in there. I will add to this video, just not yet. We'll come back to it. But for now, this is what we're going to work with. And again, I'm adding a little bit of shading in there, and then I'm going to erase where I want the sunlight to be. I'm kind of shading out this is because it's grayscale, you have to actually differentiate your lights and your shading. Because this part of the clouds are casting shadows, I don't necessarily have to have a whole lot of lighting or white on that mountain, because the sun may not hit that part, so you may see me keeping that. But right now, that side of that mountain would be just fine. I'm still not deciding as to what I want to do with that part of the mountain. And again, I will come back to it. When you're creating roads, you want to make sure that for it to wrap around, it's going to stick out further than the upper part. So you want to make sure that you have that in. And again, I'm darkening that. I could have made it where it's a black top. It's usually, if you go up Mount Eldon or you go up into the peaks of Flagstaff, they have black top roads now that go up to those mountains, and they've had them for a while. So usually they keep them pretty graded, salted. And what I did over to the one on the left, I'm doing the same thing to the one on the right. And all of those little lines that I create, I'm going to use, or I may rub in. So as you can see, there are some lines in there, and I'm just going to kind of pull down a little bit of, I want this to be where the edge here has a lot of sunlight hitting it. And I'm pulling it off of the road. Now, usually when they grade, the snow and the dirt will fall off into the mountain, off the edge of the mountain, and kind of look dirty. So if I choose to leave that the way it is below the road, that will be okay too. Now I'm using my smudging stump to actually go below the edges of my erased area and creating some darker values. I may add some heavier lines in there. And you're not supposed to draw exactly like mine. You're just supposed to learn these little methods. And all these are just different ways to make your mountain look good. And I want some of the snow to be seen to get some light from the mountain on the right, which it might show up a little bit more because that one's sticking out away from the clouds, and it may reflect a little bit more sunlight. So I'm wanting that to be seen onto the cliff areas of my mountain in the shadow. Okay, so now, usually where the snow is not touching, there's going to be these cliffs that are showing, and I have to decide where I want those cliffs to be. Sometimes they're very dangerous to go down certain sections because they've either blasted that area to prevent the snow from falling into a town. There'll be explosions to allow that avalanche to come down, and sometimes it exposes those cliffs, especially if they did a tremendous amount of explosions. And doing that is very necessary in very high mountain regions so that it doesn't create too much trouble for the town folk below. Now in Flagstaff, we didn't have a township too close to our snow-capped areas that we skied at. There were lodges and stuff. They did few small explosions, but not very many. Okay, so now I'm going to use that and create some more vertical lines, not horizontal lines. They go from right to left. Vertical lines, which is up and down, creating crevices, different marks in there. And now I want this section to be really, really bright, catching a lot of that sunlight. I should not go all the way up. I'm hoping that I didn't, which if I cover up there too much, and I should not have, that probably was not a wise idea because my clouds are creating that shading. I can choose to leave it, and so I've decided to create different areas. Now, your right side of your mountain can also have cliffs, and it's your choice as to what you want to do. I'm creating little sections in the snow where maybe an avalanche, a small avalanche has happened, or maybe someone has been snowboarding and it's usually just a single strip. These lines will show the direction of your snow, and it's very important that you have these lines. Now I'm just sketching. As you can tell, I don't have my hands real close to the pencil graphite. The further away it is, the lighter your lines will be because you're not able to push that pressure onto the paper. So now I am down to this final mountain, and you'll see me back it out again to add some greater detail to the other part. So this one has a little bit of a point to it, but as you can tell, my mountainside here has a snowdrift because it could be that the wind's blowing, and sometimes they create that drift, and this is generally where they would actually do those explosions, is because if that drift falls down on your snow skiers, it could kill them and bury them alive. It's very, very dangerous to be on a mountain that has that big of a snowdrift, and sometimes they're solid ice, so they have to actually explode those areas. So now I'm creating a little bit more shading because I didn't shade this side very well. It really doesn't matter which direction you go. It all depends upon how you want your mountain to look, and I'm just going in a cross-hatching look. Again, I'm holding my pencil at the very tip, and then I'm just pushing down really, really hard to create the shadow in here. You've got to have that very, very hard on that paper. By that pushing motion, that allows that to push that graphite from your smudging stump, your rag. If you use your finger, you need to make sure that you're using your pencil quite readily, because you won't have leftover graphite on your fingers. We have a tendency to want to get rid of that. So now again, I'm showing you here where mountains do not always have a straight configuration, so I'm creating like a crevice and changing the landscape of my mountain line. Use it to your advantage. And this could also be where it is I could create vertical lines in between those two black lines and make it to where it is purposefully creating a heavy crevice that could be very dangerous to fall down into. I'm creating lines in there where I'm choosing to make something more of, and we'll see. Oh, it looks like I'm going to. Good. I didn't remember if I did this or not. But I'm creating those vertical lines so that it has a little bit darker use. And still using the smudging stump to create the vertical lines. And I'll use that to my advantage. I do need to use the knead eraser, and underneath that snowdrift at the top, I should have that darker, because it's going to cast a shadow, and it should be darker than what you're seeing right now. So I'm not sure if I did that or not. So if you've created a snowdrift like that, make sure that you shadow right there, and I think I did. Yep. You want that shadow to be in there because it's not going to catch any sunlight. It's cold, and that's probably a very cold area right there because it's not getting any sunlight to it. And then again, using that rag other than the smudging stump, because I might want to erase something in there. Creating that heavy line. Now, the closer I am to my graphite end of my pencil is where I'm going to be creating those heavier lines and making them do what I want them to do. The further away you are from your graphite edge that draws, the lighter your drawing will be, even if you're using a B. B pencils are very difficult to erase if you're holding it like this and pushing down real hard to create darker. Okay. Now I've created those ledges. I'm going to add some more detail to them, and we're going to see some more. I'm going to try and get rid of all of those drawings of lines. And I'm not sure if I really want to go into super heavy detail. We'll see. Okay, if you notice to the right of my mountain, there is a white section. Make sure that the right side of your mountain, that your sky blends in real good. And the reason I left that white for the time being is the fact that my mountain was so light at the time that I wanted to make sure that I didn't miss it. And I'm taking my knead eraser and I'm pulling off those edges of that snow so that it looks like it's catching a lot of light. And here I go again, just pushing down onto the graphite, lifting it up with the knead eraser, rolling that knead eraser around so that I can get the maximum amount of use of the whole thing before I stretch it out and clean it up. I'm stretching it out, clean it up, and go back to it. all of those little areas that I've pushed down, I'm going to use and make them into something else. And again, because this is the end of my paper, I cannot tell you. I can guesstimate that maybe in my imagination when I was drawing this, there's a mountain on the other side is either larger or it is reflecting a whole lot of sunlight, and therefore I have permission to make this a lot lighter. So when you get to that one that is on the right, you can determine whether or not you want it real dark because there's no mountain in the way, or whether or not you have another mountain that could be creating lighter marks to it. We just never know. Okay, so now we are creating those cliff lines that we need to make it look like it's actually substantial, that there's some snow there. You could create a cave if you want, where the snow has hit. Even where there might be the shadow part, you can create where there's maybe a hidden cave in there. Again, I've created another crevice so that it has a cavernous area in there. And then I'm blending it in so that I can give more depth to it. And then I could go along the edge if I wanted to with the pink eraser and make that snow stand out a little more. Now, the edge of your snow should be darker because it's not getting any sunlight, so you want that darkness to be seen real well. And that's what should be at the bottom of your snow cliff areas. Okay, it looks like I'm going to be heading on to the snowy area. And if you don't ever put a fixative on this, you can always go back and rework it. You'll see me work on this a little bit more throughout the time that we're here. I'll have other lessons that says Lesson 9 continued because I want greater detail into it and share it with you. But right now, this is just a basic drawing. Doesn't have to have a whole lot of detail now. We'll add that as we go, as we're looking at it and we want to see how it goes. Okay, again, I'm creating those highlights and I'm slowly walking you through this. I'm not going to speed up the video because I want you guys to watch this very carefully. And take your time. Now I'm zooming out so that you can see how it's supposed to look as a landscape of your mountains. Doesn't that look good? So now we're going to start with the fog. I'm leaving a space of white because I don't want to push it down real heavy. And the lower half, I'm creating that gray vapors of fog that's touching the ground using that piece of material. All right. Now, to give that illusion of fog, you don't want to have anything in there. It also prevents beginner students from having to connect your middle ground to your background. That's going to make a big difference in beginning drawings. And I recommend that you do really the snow lesson before you do the rainy day lesson. But the snowing lessons are a whole lot easier. And if this intimidates you, try pastels. I have a pastel drawing of the snow cap or paint video lesson. And it is a little easier. Okay, now I've created a pond and a road. Now if you notice, my middle ground, the road is smaller. In the foreground, it should be wider than the one that is in the middle ground. Why? Because in Flagstaff there are hills that you have to go up and down over. And you're not going to see the same width all the way through. Your foreground sits up higher than your middle ground. That's what we're making it look like. And that way we can get that illusion of filling that whole thing in. It does not necessarily have to be straight. You can make these roads crooked, make them winding. There are a few things you're going to have to add to it, and it all depends upon the direction that you go. So now we're going to fill in this whole entire section, and we're going to create all of that dark. So I will probably splice this and speed this section up. All right, now that I have taken all the graphite, I'm using the graphite from the road and smudging in some gray shading on the edge, and you'll see what that's for here in a little bit. Growing up in Flagstaff, Arizona, a lot of the snow there would actually be very, very high. I remember digging ourselves out of the snow area, so you could have drifts 10, 15, 20 feet tall, and it would take a while to just get a 2-lane road out of a 4-lane road with plows. So now that I've taken that gray, darker gray area, I've also shaded in a little bit of the left side, but I'm adding little spots on it to create dirt fragments that would be picked up by the bulldozer, so that it can show fragments of dirt. And I'll zoom in here in a little bit, but I want you to see it as a whole. And then I'm going to take this eraser and go right along the edge, making sure that my edging is stays white. Because as you know, in any area, when they're plowing with snow, it does have a tendency to get dirty because it picks up the oil and the grease from the trucks. Because they've dealt with dirt and salt and sand. And now we're going to start with a tree. We'll zoom in here in a little bit. Just like you've seen at the very top, we start making kind of like a horizontal lines to look like a triangle. Okay, you need to at least have 2 of these on your drawings. And then I'm taking the knead eraser and erasing certain areas on the tree that would be where the snow would land and stay on there. So I'm going to zoom in, and I'm making little branches that you might see sometimes when a tree gets full of snow. And these fir trees and pine trees drop, they have a tendency to expose their branches, and that's what you're seeing here, and that's allowable. So now I'm going to be drawing upside down, and where I have the darker areas, where I'm going to keep the main tree. So you decide where you want that to be. Then I'm going to be taking the knead eraser, or you could even use a bigger eraser, kind of making it look more like a fir tree, and then I'm taking off some of the tree edges because that's what will make it look like there's snow on it. We're going to have to outline it a little bit so that we know where our shading stops. And I recommend that you make these eraser marks really, really bright. This is where you could use an eraser shield, which I have not presented to you in this project, and erase certain areas where you can get that really bright color that you need, and just kind of outline some of that snow. But that's going to need to be really erased really well. You don't want to leave that shaded. So then I have my snow coming up here. It's easier to paint these trees like this than it is to actually draw them, because you have to have a little more detail into them. And you can even cut across some of those branches that are showing. I didn't do it in this one, but you can. You just have these little areas where it's showing that there's a bunch of snow on there. And I need to do a little more erasing on that one, but that's okay if you don't, because sometimes the bottom half doesn't have a whole lot of snow compared to the top. And then we have our shadow. Now remember, our shading on our mountain goes to the right. So just like your shading onto your trees will go to the right. Every shadow of everything that you have is going to go to the side that you have your shade on your mountain. So keep that in mind. And you can just erase what you don't want. And you can have it where it looks like it's dipping down and it shortens the tree look. It can be like what I've got, a flat area. You can have it where it looks bumpy, but I also need to blend in above that shadow some of that shading in there, because it's going to cause some of that snow to not look like snow. See, these graphite colors on here should never be pure white unless you want it to be stark raving white to where it shows extreme brightness. And that's usually in your foreground. You won't see a whole lot of brightness if you look in photographs and you look at some of the stuff and distances, they could have variations of color. If there are no clouds, your snow will be a bluish color because it's reflecting of the light, the sky. And as it gets darker, it starts changing colors too. Okay, so now if you notice that the road got smaller and so did the edges of the plow edge. So now I'm trying to figure out just how much of this edge I'm going to have. But there's kind of a problem at the very top of my foreground. Where that dirt touches, it should actually be at a right angle, not necessarily at a flat angle. Because if you want to give the illusion of extreme height and tell everybody that this was a very tall grade of snow, you want to have that out. So we're going to fix that here in a little bit. And you'll see that. Now, what I'm doing is I'm creating a darker edge because that's not getting any sunlight. Just like your mountains, you're going to have that side shaded. And with those little ripples, you want those in there because then you want to create those little nice grains. Now see the difference between the bottom and the top? I need to create the dark line also with the top part. But as you can tell, here we go. Now I'm creating that grade. So that means that that line that I have from that road has got to change to the angle. So if I don't do that, I'm still giving that illusion that there's really, it doesn't have that. So I've got to change that angle. So that means taking that line and moving it to where it looks like a slope. And see, now you've got the illusion of that road having that tall area there. It gives the illusion that the snow is deep. So now we're going to create the darker line and create slopes along our edge. I'm using the smudging stump to kind of start off with the shadows on the upper part for the basic reason that that smudging stump will allow me to be able to create different variations. And as you remember, these were not straight lines. So I'm taking for every little bump and curve, I'm making those vertical lines that go up and down. I'm making those vertical lines, adding the shadow in first before I do the detail. I'll zoom in here in a little bit, but I want you to see how that makes that look like it is actually deeper. It's very, very important that you create those vertical lines. And as you get further in, they blend together. They go right on into the fog. Sometimes you might not even see that point. It may be where it just cuts off a lot quicker. So I can choose to make that line on the middle ground as dark as the one I have up here. But right now I'm kind of shading it. Each little section should have a vertical line. You want to do your shading lines. I'm going to try and zoom in here. Good. Now I'm taking a little bit of my hands because I don't want a full graphite from the paper, and I'm just pulling off of the road. See how it's changing? See the middle ground being a little bit darker than the foreground? Now I'm going to add the edging, give it a little bit darker color, but I don't want to push in real hard. I'm just barely rubbing in. I don't want a whole lot of color to it. I just want to give a hint, because when I lighten it up in specific areas, it will show more of a sun hitting that area. The shadows will create, oh, well, there was footprints, there was marks in the ground, somebody was using their sled, somebody was walking on there. And you just work on these very slowly. It does take a while to work on them. Okay, now we're working on the fence. This is where I'm going to have to zoom in, but I'm creating a line and basically doing an L shape. You don't want to do a square, and you really don't want to do a line that has your fence line going 3 lines or 3 sectional lines, because it's too hard on a new artist to get the concept. So just creating a small L where it's just 2 sets, it's not as hard on a beginner. Okay, now I'm using a T-square to create my little vertical line right there at the point so that I am able to have my fence posts. You'll see me use my eraser shield or the ruler here on the left to help me with my fence lines. But right now I'm trying to establish my post. The rest of it is going to be right in front of you at a straight line, but this perspective from going to the front into the back, your line should get smaller and closer together. The lines will be vertically shorter and they will be extremely close together. When I show you my eraser shield, you could use the different sizes on the eraser shield to help with that. Now we are going to create snow on the fence, but right now I just created the line just to kind of give me an idea of where I want my fence posts. Sometimes you may not even see fence posts, so this could be a 10-foot chain link fence or 10-foot fencing, because it may need to keep critters in. Who knows? So it's not just a little tiny 3-foot, 4-foot fence. You have to realize that these are snowdrifts that are approximately 10 foot tall. So if I'm giving it 10 feet in the snow and I'm creating these little fence posts that might look like 2 feet, you're looking at 12-foot, 10-foot snowdrifts with 10-foot posts. Now I'm creating a right angle straight to the edge of my paper. You'd be better off to do that because new artists do not understand the perspective angles. If you create more than those 2 sides, you're going to get lost. I'm going to zoom in here in just a little bit so you guys can see more of that fencing. But I'm using just the width of the ruler to keep an equal distance from fence post to fence post, so that they are all the exact same distance in the front. And we're going to be doing different angle drawings. Okay, so you'll want to make sure you keep your fence post level. And you want to give it a little bit of shadowing in there, because we're going to lighten up some of that to make it look like it's got snow on there. So hopefully I will zoom in soon. But I'm taking my smudging stump and going right up along the fence post line. And for the bottom of each of the posts you see, I'm creating those shadow lines. You're not going to see too much of it. I recommend that when you get further back that you start using a smaller smudging stump. They work better. This one was really too bulky, so I had to go back and erase some of them. But down here in the very front, you're not going to have hardly a shadow. You're just going to have a gray line because it'll cast a shadow, but it's not going to be that much of a difference. So you kind of want to have that a little thick. And then we continue on creating the fence posts all the way through. Now I've also cut off some of the area where there is snow, but I'm also taking an eraser because I decided not to use a smaller smudging stump to erase in between, or to draw those lines. Now I have to erase some of that. And I'm just lightening up some of that snow. I don't want it to be completely light, but I don't want it to be completely dark. When you stick your hands on these and you're working with them, you're going to end up with your hands casting graphite everywhere. So sometimes it helps to have a paper underneath your hand as a shield. If you've watched my rainy day lesson, I used a shield because I was making a smaller image. Okay, we're going to start zooming in. I hope. Nope, had to get a bigger eraser. Okay, I'm creating a lighter snow in between each fence post. Recreating my line to make sure I have it. Then I'll shade it in. Don't want it too dark is the issue. I'm going to fast forward the rest of this so that you can see, and I will stop it in between each piece as you're watching me work and explaining it. Right now I'm making my fence posts rather dark because they are going to be like posts, fence tree posts, not like chain link fence posts. Okay, we've gotten our fence posts down. I'm going to zoom in here in just a few minutes. I darkened in all of the posts. Using the smudging stump helped a lot. And as you see, I'm kind of making these little lines really, really dark. I want them to be seen, so I'm going back over where I'm seeing it. I'll zoom in here in just a minute. Okay, if you notice, there are some lines in there. I looked at the width of the ruler and it kind of made the ruler look a little too thick or too thin, so I wanted them a little wider. So what I did was I ended up putting a dot where the lines should have been and decided against it. Now what I'm doing is I'm darkening in my fence posts to make them look more like trees because they're going to be unnatural, and it's okay if some of them have these little broken off spots to them, and gives you a little more leeway to make mistakes and make them look weird, and they don't have to be absolutely perfect. You just allow yourself to kind of free draw those little lines and they're not going to look straight. There's no way. We're not using a ruler, we're not using anything but our own free hands. And this is where you're going to use a little pressure. If you notice the way my hands are positioned, it's a little closer to that graphite. There's a reason I skipped that one. You'll see here in a little bit. I'm going to change it some. I think that's the one I'm changing. I guess not. I just accidentally skipped it. Okay, so you're going to do this throughout the whole entire fence line. When you're finished with that, we'll move on to the next step. I did decide I wanted to have a broken fence in here, so I'm going to go over that, and then I'm going to skip past all this. You guys will fill in the rest. Right now my fence is broken right here. I've decided to let it just kind of look like it's broke, and then I'm going to finish off my fence line. All right. I'm creating all these lines above and on top of my line. You will see why. And then I will add snow to it. So you finish the rest of the fences just like that. All right, I finished the front of the fence, but I want to show you how to do snow. I'm going to take a little bit of this fence line. I'm going to erase that because I want the snow to be seen. So I'm going to make a loop, and I'm just going to go along the tops of each one. And I recommend that you use this very lightly. Don't make this where it should be absolutely perfect. You can take an eraser shield over the top of this later. But go by real lightly, using your smudging stump to go over the top of your shadow if you absolutely have to, but I recommend that you don't. You should be making the top of your snow white. So this is kind of a guard, and you want to sketch it. Do not try to draw it heavy. Okay, now I'm just kind of blurring the lines a little bit. And you can even take a little bit of your, I would recommend that you use a smaller smudging stump instead of that bulky one I'm using. That will help you with creating these lines a whole lot better than what I've done. Now what I did in the front, you should be doing along as far as you possibly can. The first few fence posts that are fairly decently visible, they should be done just like the ones in the front, where you outline them and they look like trees. It'll give it a better definition. Now, this is what I was showing you earlier, but it was too far away. You just use your smudging stump to create the shadows. And then you want to kind of take your finger and blend. Now we're going to work on the snow part. The snow sits up pretty tall. It's not going to stay on a fence post real tall, especially since they are not a solid ground or very fat. So go along the top of your fences. That helps a lot easier, and then it makes it easier to make your crown above your posts. And then you can take your smudging stump and connect them all together. So you just keep doing that all the way through. Very lightly, don't do it heavy. Don't push down and draw hard. If you notice, my hands are not real close to my graphite tip. It's quite a distance away so that I'm not pushing down real hard. If you push down real hard, you cannot erase it. Okay, so you see the snow? What I would do is I'd take my eraser shield and go back over these. And again, I would recommend that you use a smaller smudging stump. The big ones are great for bigger areas, but your little ones really work a whole lot better than these big ones for that. And then I recommend that you take an eraser to go over the top of that extra shadow if you use a smudging stump that big, which I did not do. You will do this along as far as you can on the side fence, but you're going to create a shadow on top of your fence because your snow is casting a shadow. All right, one thing I did not do is I did not darken in my fence on the past the broken one. So you might want to make sure that your fences all kind of look the same. These I did not do. All right, I'll meet you on the other end. All right, we're back and we are going to have a part 2 because there are some flaws that I'm seeing that we can make corrections on. But for now, for beginners, this is not too bad. We're going to make a couple of trees in here. We're going to fix up the road. I'm taking my knead eraser and I'm erasing the snow on top of my fence line. I will later on thicken the snow that goes back into the background in the shadow part only. I'm also going to create a gray tone of graphite in between the road and the fence so that I can give that illusion. And again, here I am using my finger, and I should not be. I should be using not a smudging stump, either a tissue, a rag, or those rags that they use for glasses. Okay, so the top part of this shadow is going to be the snow on top of the fence. You're not going to see it so much on top of that distance fencing unless we create a grayscale and darken that area where my finger was. But we've got to use this rag. So I create this shading, and I be careful not to push too hard. You don't want it real dark. Allow it to be a very light gray. You do not want a darkened area. Then you go on top of your fence line and you make that white on there. Sometimes it just probably wouldn't hurt for you to just take an eraser and go right along the top. In part 2, we will take a look at every little detail up close and make those more finite details. This is where you're probably going to use a mechanical pencil. And yes, mechanical pencils are valuable when it comes to the finer details when you're needing those sharp lines. Okay, we're going to be making a tree. I'm going to zoom in so that you can see. Let's find the tree. There we are. All right. We're going to make the triangular part of the tree. And again, we are going to see just the basics of a tree. Don't worry about trying to be detailed oriented. We will work on that a little bit more. All right, so whatever you do, remember our shadow is on the right hand side, so our shadow on this tree also has to be on the right, keeping that same thing in mind. Okay, so I'm going to add my shadow, and depending upon how much you go behind your tree or beside your tree will determine whether or not you're going to have your tree large, wide, and I am shading over to the left, and I think I'm adding another tree in there, I'm not sure. Doing the same thing, creating the shadow. We will have a secondary part 2 to this so that we can refine the image a little better. But as of now, we are working on just the basics. So we will be revisiting this piece. Now remember, we've already drawn this before, so this one I didn't add the stumps to. You can do that. I'm just showing you how to do those little snow drifts on top of a tree. Sometimes you will not see the stumps on and through a tree if it is a fir tree. Fir trees are very full. Pine trees, you will see the branches in a tree. So now we're working on the snow drifts from the snowplow. And as you can see, we're going to darken in the lines where the ground has been moved. Usually snowplows will push snow to a section of road. And most of the time on heavy snows, you might end up with a 1 to 2 lane road, depending upon where it's at. If it's a major highway, you'll end up with 2 lanes. If it's just like back roads, you might end up with a 1 lane. But they can be pretty hairy. Okay, so we are drawing a heavy line to represent our edging, and you'll want to use your knead eraser to lighten up that edge of that snow scene in there. Yours does not have to look exactly like mine. You just need to remember that wherever you have your little wiggle lines that are not exactly straight, there's going to be some lines that are vertical. You will notice that further on down, we may have some sloped lines. Make sure you're using a smudging stump to kind of blur them off, and there is no right or wrong when it comes to these lines. So just because you think you might be finished on part 1, we're not. We're just doing the basics to kind of get through this. We will refine it in part 2. Okay, sometimes there could be slopes where kids will slide down or pound on it, or it was real loose when they were plowing it and it created a type of an avalanche. So that's where you see those crevices up there near the top right-hand side. And again, we're reinforcing the lines so that we can see the edge. This also helps us when we start doing our highlights to make the snow look like it's brighter at the top. We want those lines to be fairly heavy. And then we're going to take our knead eraser and pull off some of that shading in there. Be very careful that you don't erase your main line or you'll have to redraw it. But you want a gradual gradation, which means a slow change from light to dark. You don't want it to be powerfully bright white. You want it to be a light gray. That's why we use the knead eraser, so that it creates a light edging. Now, if you notice on the other side of the road, I have some smudges. We're going to lighten them up too later on down the road. And when you get further to the fog, you don't have to worry about that being so significant, because that fog is going to change the way that property looks and the way the snow may look, because that fog is creating an edging. So now we're going to pull off. We're doing this very lightly. We want to still keep the gray in there, but we're just very gently pulling off some of the gray. All right, we've got our fog in there. So back in behind the tree, you're going to see that little gradation in there. It's okay to actually view that as a darker color, because your fog may slowly roll in and you won't have it refined. Okay, so I'm kind of still creating the shadow in there for a reason. I'm just using the the finger just very gently, but I'm also taking my eraser to make it look like there are little sled marks. And usually snowmobiles will end up in certain areas that you actually have to use to make those slopes and get to those areas, because you can't get through with a vehicle. You have to use a snowmobile. All right, so now we have our larger piece. We have decently created the middle ground. We're going to refine it just a little bit, but let's start with our pond. We're going to give it a little bit of shading around the edge of the pond. Notice again, I'm holding the pencil to the side so I can get the maximum amount. Make sure your pencil is sharpened so that you can create that shading edging in there. And use your smudging stump. This is where a smudging stump comes in handy. And you want that shadow in there on that particular side. We're going to add more to it when we get to the right side of the road in our foreground. And again, we are lightening up the edges of the snow so that we can show that the land is not level. So you don't have to worry about creating straight lines. Unless you're doing a fence, straight lines are not necessary in snow scenes. That's why it's so wonderful to do snow scenes and learn how to draw snow scenes to begin with, because they're so forgiving. And I'm using the smudging stump to help create different edgings, but I'm also really wanting to use the cloth because I like the way it gets the color in there that I need. If I use a smudging stump, I can't erase it very well. Using this type of material really helps spread that color where you need it to be. Yeah, we're going to have the edge of our snow pond where it's going to be light, but there should be a thickness on the farthest side of the snowbank on the pond. Now you have to realize that snow, when it settles on the water, takes a little bit longer for it to build up. So you will have a snowbank on the edge of your pond. Whereas in your pond itself, it will have a lower section of snow. And we're going to have that look here in just a little bit. So you want a fairly thick band of color, and we will improve on that when we come back to part 2. So what we're going to do is we're going to create where we want our fishing stick to be, and we're going to pretend like we're doing some ice fishing. So we're going to make a circle or an oval or a weird shaped amoeba, and we're going to fill the whole thing in very dark. You have to realize that we're not using color, so blues, purples, browns, all of that are going to have a black and white color to them. So I'm going to fill this whole thing in. And make sure that you do it fairly heavy because you want this to look thicker. We'll refine that as well. But we're just getting the basics in, and then we're going to come back through and create a heavier look and make it more detailed is the words I'm looking for. Okay, so we're creating a fairly dark stick, and then we're going to create a shadow, which I should be using a smudging stump to create that shadow. If you have a smudging stump, I'd rather you use that. I'm laying my pencil sideways to create that extra V in our stump so that it will hold our string into the water. And ice fishing can come in several different ways. Sometimes it is set up way in the summertime when you have a chance to really put that thing into the ground with a weight to it. And then you may have a 10-foot stick with a strand on it, and you wind it around the top part and just let it with the bag, put a bag over it and let it sit, and then when snow comes, you do your ice fishing. Now, generally, you'd end up doing it on the lake, but this is just a small sample. If you're smart, you'd stock your pond up. It's very difficult to stock your pond up in the way out in the mountains. Okay, I'm kind of pulling away some of the color away from the edge of the pond. It should be white, but we also should have an edging along there, and that's what we're going to work on in our details for the next time around when it comes to doing details. Now you're going to have a shadow. Remember which way your shadows are going to go. It's going to go the same direction as your mountain shadow. So my mountain shadow is on the right. So my stick shadow will be on the right-hand side of that hole. If yours is on the left, make sure that you go in the direction that your mountain shadows are. Okay. Using a smudging stump, I really should be creating the shadow using that smudging stump, not a pencil. Because I'm not getting enough of the white, I want it to show a lot of the white in there. And I'm using the graphite in the hole itself to pull the shadow so I can get what I want. And there's my string going down in the water. Alright, so now we're going to add a little bit more shading to the lower half of our pond because it's not getting any light from our sun. And you have to realize that this is a fairly big piece of paper. That's why you see me moving around it quite a bit. And those of you that are in my classroom, you should know how big the piece is because it sticks on my wall. All right, so now we're going to use the material and we're going to create the shading in there. And that's how big I want my walls to be on my lake. Now, in the front, you're not going to have that dark of an area. Now you can create a few little shadow pieces in there and light pieces. So maybe you have a little bit of snow sticking up. So we're going to leave that for a little bit and we're going to work on our little steps that goes to our snow. Now there is a problem because if our snowbank from the vehicles are 5-10 feet tall, there's no way that we could actually jump that high and make these footsteps from the road. So we've got to accommodate that. But we're going to make footsteps that go into the hole that we've created. Okay, in just a little bit, you're going to see these lines. I'll zoom in here in just a little bit, but I'm creating one side of the footprint to have the dark shadows. Now, if you notice, where the footprints go, if I was to actually create the footprints and then a drop off, that doesn't make sense. So I have to make it make sense because I'm putting that the snow drifts were so high. Logically, they were high on the other side as well. So we're going to do kind of an area where a vehicle might pull off, but we're also going to make it where they had to dig a place to put their vehicle out of the road. And then we're going to put snow drifts and ledges next to the shoe footprints. Okay, what I've got down there when I use the smudging stump is the first part of tire tracks. And you can have tracks in there if you want, but you don't really have to. Like I said, part 2 will do a little more detail to it. And I'll talk you and walk you through each and every one where we can actually add more detail. This is where you will need a mechanical pencil. Okay, I am using the knead eraser to make sure that I leave spaces between the footprints. You could even have it where there's a chair there. I would just put 4 dots in there. Now I'm creating a space where the bulldozer might have pulled over to park and push the snow right up against it, so that way it looks like a car could fit there or a truck. I will need to make that ledge for the tire tracks a little bit deeper. I'm going to zoom in. You should be able to see the footprints now. See how one side is a little darker? That was our goal, to make those lines. Did a little bit of smudging because when we walk on snow, we don't necessarily leave just a flat footsteps, especially at height when the snow is real deep. Sometimes you'll drag your feet, and I could go a little deeper in there if I choose to be. So you want this area to look like it is very, very heavy, like the snowplow may have pushed the snow up in there. It may have parked. Maybe the snowplow individual had this spot ready for them, and trucks come in. You never know, but there are areas you could even make that spot a little bit darker. The whole thing really doesn't have to be that light because that's going to have a whole lot of shading to it. But what I'm doing is I'm putting in the tire tracks. You can even put an oil stain in there to make it look authentic. And you want that to be a little bit dirty. You could even have footprints going out on the snow from the vehicles. And now we got to make a ledge on this side where the footprints are so that we can actually tell how deep it is. We should have it pretty near as deep as that ledge. Why I am doing the edge of it to have highlights to it, it's not necessary, so you don't necessarily need that. I'm just lightening it up, but I'm also pulling the graphite down in. I don't want it to be really all that dark because your footprints will create a shaded area. Okay, so I backed up, and if you look real close to where the footprints are, we have the ledge showing. I'm darkening in the top just like I did on the side of the road and creating those little segments in there. I'll zoom in here after a bit. I just want you to see it as a whole. You will need to have an edge on the other side. But it's not going to be as apparent. Just like the front of the pond, you can't hardly tell. You're going to have the same kind of thing happen. Okay, so see, I'm pulling now the snow off because I want it to look like it's got more light to that than it does down in that walkway that we created. See, now it looks like it's supposed to be. And you can actually add a small ledge on the pond too to make it look like there's just so much snow and you had to dig down for it. It's not necessary. Sometimes your ponds will be a little bit lighter. We're going to create a slope for kids that looks like kids are sliding down with a snow sled. You could even have it where they go from the pond on around, because at that point, when we first started doing this, we did not make a designated area for them to be at. But like I said, part 2 is coming. We're just doing small little bits, getting a little bit here and there. I'm creating highlights as to where the top of the snow would be on the water. Generally, your snow won't be as thick because your water has to freeze first in order for you to even walk on it. So assuming that the pond is frozen, since we have a hole, we are able to walk on it. It just won't be as thick full of snow as the rest of the snow drifts. If you understand how science works and you understand how ice works, you'll understand how it goes. All right, so now we're going to darken in the edge of our pond because it's not getting any sunlight. Now the other side will get some sunlight, so we're going to have that a little bit lighter. But this is just part 1. We're darkening in the areas where we would not see a whole lot of sunlight in there. All right, I am lightening up the top of it. Personally, I think I would go a little bit deeper because of the way the ledge is for us to walk. And like I said, this is only part 1, so we're going to refine it. It does take a little while for you to get the whole image done and have it to where it looks more realistic. So it does take a little while. I'm kind of getting the dark smudges off of there so that we can have it look a little more like snow. And it seems like it's a lot of erasing and a lot of coloring with gray tones, values with graphite. Don't worry about it. That's what all this process is for. If you get into doing something like Jonah Dry's work, you won't be doing a whole lot of erasing. You'll be doing a lot of really good drawing. But this is just grayscale. It's not high quality realism or hyper-realism, so you're not going to be required to do extensive amount of work. Okay, now we are creating the edge of our pond in the front that has a whole lot of snow on it. We want it to look fairly deep. Now from where the truck parks, you can make that as a slope for your kiddos to go sliding in. But what I would do is I would make footsteps that goes around from the parked vehicle to where the pond is, and then have footsteps to the sledding area. But we haven't done that yet. That will be in part 2. You have to have an access point to make it look a little more realistic. This is not as detailed as I would probably really have it. I'm just doing a basic drawing, and for those of you that are in Art 2, you will pursue beyond this point. Part 1, I'm just expecting my Art 1 students to do this. My Art 2, you have to go beyond this. So this is where you will be taking the Part 2. Okay, now we're zooming in on our snow sledding area. To give that movement that you're looking at large snow drifts, you're going to curve your lines. And now what we're going to do is we're going to make tiny little footsteps, because these would be little kids' steps, and they don't exactly have gigantic footsteps. And you could smear those steps, because if the snow is deep, they're going to walk generally where the snow sledding was, which that could be this highlighted part that we have, and that may be the compact part of the snow. We don't know. You can make it where the shaded part is your sledding zone, depending upon what type of sled you use. If you use a toboggan, more than likely you will compact your snow, because you can put 2 to 3 people on it, and it doesn't necessarily make divots like what I've created here. If you have a round shield type sled, you can make some divots like that. So it all depends upon the type of sled you have. If you have double rail sleds, they'll look like tracks on a train going down. So it all depends upon what type of sled you really have. So the way I've got it set up is we are having an area where either dad steps or yep, we're doing Bigfoot steps now. You can even have drag marks of your sleds. It would just be a line going through there. Now, not too far from here, you're going to see the requirements that are going to be seen. You're going to have to pause in the video to make sure that you have those particular scenes. I had them on the board, but this is our assessment so that students can assess their work and make sure that they get it, and it also helps the teacher. I'm going to create a hyperlink down below to do a rubric so that the students can figure out what kind of points they've created. It might help teachers that if they plan to use this as a lesson, this will help. Okay, again, with big, deep footsteps, you're going to have a shaded area. That's why I'm doing these lines. Now, if you're in Art 1, we're not going to make it a very big, detailed piece, but Art 2, we're going to go into creating a more defined snow scene. So I'm just smudging in those dark lines. And of course, it really should look like we're dragging our feet because it's supposed to be fairly deep. And what I would do is I would make the footsteps of the little child a whole lot maybe more shaded, because maybe the parent could have stomped all that down for the child to walk in. Or even taking snow, and you can take a round sled and rub it on that area to make sure that that child has a way to walk. You want to compact that snow down and make it more icy. So now we've got some other footsteps that are going up the other side. It could be two children, and he's going up this section where he did take the sled down and it's a little more compact. Could be an older child wanting to do things on his own. Those are our rambunctious, stubborn children. They're the ones that have more grit than the littler ones at the moment. Usually students that are independent usually have a little more grit. Okay, we've got footsteps going up. We're going to shade in our sledding area because it's not getting a whole lot of sun on that side. You don't want both sides. You want it to have a little bit of light to it. Okay, there we go. I do recommend that you create an area where you're going to have footsteps to that. Maybe from where you come in off the lake, off the pond, and meet around to it. Okay. Don't forget to slow down on the rubric when you start looking at it for your points. Okay, so now here we're going to create a very tall tree that has lost its leaves, and we're going to create branches. I'm going to show you how to create branches on a tree. Always remember to have that little bit of V. When you're dealing with snow on a tree, you don't have to worry about so much of the root system on a tree. And since this is a very tall tree, considering that you could have your snowdrifts at a very high level, these are very interesting trees that would be carrying on to that height. Aspens are white trees, so if I choose to make this aspens, I would keep the bark white with little bits of dark spots in there. But I'm going to make it just a regular tree. I think I colored it in. Yep, we colored it in. It can be an oak tree. Oak trees grow to be very, very tall. Now, if I was to create something that had maple trees, they do not grow very tall. This, you could say, is almost like a tree from California, those great big huge trees that are protected, that people cannot cut down anymore. California. Okay, we're going to zoom in and take a look at how we're doing it. You do want to have more branches in this. You do not want to have straight lines. If you have straight lines, you're doing your tree injustice. So you want to make sure that you're creating those wavy lines, crooked lines. And we're just going to look on the branches. I'm going to show you how to do a few of these. You notice I have most of my pencil. I'm not using my hand real close to the graphite lead, and I'm just creating these branches going every different direction. The more branches you have on your tree, the more likely you're going to create a very good looking tree. You do not want to have it where it looks like it's just tiny little branches sticking out and you stop. You want to have a very abundant amount of branches in there. And the more you do, the better it looks. You want them where they overlap a lot. Now, if you do not have, you can have an area where you're deciding that you don't want to have that tree with branches. You could make it out like it's dead, and then I would actually take the end of those branches and make them look like either they've been struck by lightning, they have been dying due to a disease to them. It really doesn't matter how you go about doing it. Like they're rotten, maybe some termites got into that section of the tree. Okay, now we're darkening the area. We're going to add snow to this eventually, so we're going to add white pastel chalk to it. Now don't forget your shadow at the base of your tree as well. Even at this point, this tree is not really full enough. It should have a whole lot more branches. So make sure that you fill in your branches a whole lot more. And I do apologize for working on the tree on its base and you not seeing it. Forgive me. You want to make sure you're smudging in your deep dark lines. You want your tree to look like it's actually colored in, so make sure you fill it in real good. All I'm doing right now, even though you may not be able to see it, is I am coloring in some of the area of the tree. And where your thicker branches are is where your snow is going to sit, so you might want to erase that. You'll go back over that with some graphite white or charcoal white and fill all of those white spots in, but you want to make sure that your snow is able to sit on those heavier, thicker branches. Evidently my smudging stump's not making me happy. And then I have to go back in and erase all of that excess smudging. That's the only thing that's hard about it. Gotta have our snow on our tree. I've smudged in too much of the graphite in there. I'll have to fix the other one as well. All right, wherever you have those large V's is where your snow is going to sit. So you want to erase that area and prevent that. All right, well, I'm gonna leave you off to come back in just a little bit and explain some more. Once this tree is done, you just keep watching and keep working on your piece. Good luck. All right, this is our final product. Make sure you check the rubric. Okay, each section of this is how much you are supposed to be spending on each part of it. So make sure that you stay focused on those particular days. Don't forget to check part 2 for the greater details of the snow scene. Thank you very much. Thanks for watching.